Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer and welcome to the breaking news. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe and support us on Patreon, link in the description below. Today we have absolutely breaking news coming from all around the world as we've been able to hear that the Ukrainian armed forces have made massive ground inside the Toretsk battlefield, threatening the Russian rear lines with a possible encirclement. Meanwhile, we've also been able to hear at the exact same time that the United States of America has moved more B-2 Spirit stealth bombers to Diego Garcia than the amount of B-2 stealth bombers that's ever been deployed outside of the U.S. borders at a single time in history. At the exact same time, we've also been able to hear that a possible leader of the Yemeni Houthis has been killed today, as well as an Iranian anti-ship missile bunker being showed by the Islamic Republic of Iran's government as a possible threat to global shipping passing through the Strait of Hormuz and into the Persian Gulf. Meanwhile, diplomatic conferences in between the United States and the Russian Federation appear to have proved to make very little results, as the United States has announced and has touted that a 30-day energy infrastructure ceasefire, as well as a naval ceasefire, has gone into effect as of today. However, the Russian Federation insists otherwise, saying that those are the agreements of a possible ceasefire, but the Russian Federation will not be putting any of the ceasefire into effect until the United States lifts sanctions, meaning that the United States has to give Russia what it wants, and we just have to trust and hope that they'll follow along with what they're claiming they'll do right now. Meanwhile, inside of Europe, we've been able to hear that the European Union has now moved forward a major announcement that all European citizens must have a 3-day emergency supplies kit ready in case of the outbreak of war or a natural disaster. The Czech Republic has also sustained a significant explosion today, as it appears that Russian saboteurs have detonated an ammunition depot inside of the country, causing significant damage to the depot and possibly some surrounding areas. Meanwhile, we've also been able to hear that the People's Republic of China has 12 auto manufacturers that are soon to prepare to move themselves out of Russia and back into China due to absolutely abysmal sales in the Russian market and the poor economic activity that exists within the country currently. But we have quite a lot of news to cover today. And moving on into our first piece of news, inside the Toretsk Oblast, or more so the Donetsk Oblast, near to the city of Toretsk, we've been able to hear that the Ukrainians have taken a massive swath of ground to the south of Toretsk. Toretsk is a fairly interesting battlefield, and is the battlefield that largely is the successor to the Battle of Avdiivka. The Battle of Toretsk is once again another city that was along the original near 2014-2016 border of the Donbass conflict, and at this point, it appears that the Ukrainian armed forces have been able to make some significant advances and are certainly retaking large areas surrounding the city and the city itself. At this moment, we understand that the Ukrainian armed forces control a larger part of the city center and have continued to be able to conduct counteroffensive operations that are leading the Russians into an encirclement within the actual city itself. However, the Ukrainian armed forces have made an unbelievable lightning offensive within the southern flank of the city today, retaking all of the major villages along the Kryvyi-Toretsk River, a significant valley that the Russian Federation has been using for supply purposes and defense purposes throughout a larger part of the battle. The valley has provided some limited defense to supply trucks that may have been trying to move through the area, but once again, FPV drones and other kinds of precision-guided munitions have largely mitigated the effects of terrain and the ability to at least conceal logistics movements or troop movements throughout most times of the day, but nevertheless, it has proved to be a small asset to the Russian Federation. With the loss of the southern flank, this now means that the city of Toretsk is directly being threatened with Russian encirclement. Not only that, Ukrainian forces are continuing to make advances deeper into the eastern area of the city of Toretsk in a possible attempt to try and encircle the Russian Federation forces that are still trying to hold doggedly within the center area of the town. It appears by all counts on all flanks that the Russian Federation's front line is collapsing within this area, and we're not really expecting it to last that much longer. If the Ukrainian offensive keeps up at this pace, we expect that the Russian Federation will mostly be pushed entirely out of Toretsk and on towards Orlivka within the next several weeks, meaning that Ukraine would have returned the front line back to the original front line that was seen at the very beginning of the invasion in 2022. Moving on from that, we have been able to hear that there's been significant actions happening inside the Middle East. To make sure to get y'all to some of the bigger news that we have first and foremost. Inside of the capital of Sana'a, we have been able to hear that there is a possibility that the head of the Houthis Abd al-Alamek al-Houthi has possibly been eliminated today by a U.S. airstrike. We did already hear about several days ago from the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz that they had taken out most of the Yemeni Houthis' leadership and fighting abilities. It appears that may not be entirely true. We're now getting unconfirmed reports that the leader of the Houthis may have been killed as of today. That means that when that statement was made by the National Security Advisor, the head honcho of the Yemeni government had not been completely wiped out, but it does appear that at this point there is a decent likelihood that he may have been killed in an airstrike. Once again, it's an unconfirmed report, however, and we will have to wait for picture or video evidence on our end to be able to confirm it, but we do want to make sure to get the story out there just in case if the Houthi leader was actually killed. As of today, we'll be making sure to inform y'all that that's at least in the works right now of being verified. Moving on from that, however, it does seem as though the Islamic Republic of Iran is still attempting to put itself into a warlike posture within the region, as it has started to unveil a brand new underground base, another one that is showing a large amount of anti-ship missiles and other kinds of rocketry and weaponry that could be used by the Islamic Republic of Iran against the United States of America, Israel, or any other hostile powers within the region. We can see this underground bunker here in the video, and we can see that it's showing a large variety of different kinds of missiles and rocketry that could be used by the Islamic Republic of Iran to launch attacks on any targets, at least within the near vicinity of their borders. Specifically, these missiles are directly threatening the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is the small passageway in between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, seen right here. This is the shortest area or the smallest area of passage throughout the entirety of this region, and for this reason, the Iranians are able to exert a large amount of control through direct fire onto this area, pretty much blocking anyone off from entering the Persian Gulf or exiting the Persian Gulf if they ever wanted to with conventional weaponry means. This is something that is somewhat concerning and is leading me to believe that this underground facility is most likely close to the direction of Bandar Abbas, or may even be on the island of Qashem, because it would only make sense that they would have the anti-ship missile weaponry available at any given moment nearest to the place where it would be needed the most, which would be the Strait of Hormuz. If this is the case, the United States of America is most likely using its intelligence sources to comb through the desert, and of course this isn't like Spaceballs where, you know, they actually use a giant comb. They're most likely combing through it with satellite imagery and trying to find anywhere where there's some sort of a larger roadway that may lead somewhere into the middle of nowhere, which would suggest that there is some sort of an underground bunker that road is leading to. To move anti-ship missiles and other kinds of vehicles into this bunker means that it has to have a decent amount of infrastructure outside of it to be able to support the movement of those kinds of heavier vehicles. You can't really drive an 18-wheeler over the middle of the sand in the desert. You usually have to be able to create some kind of a road, because high or heavy road traffic in surge moments could produce undrivable road conditions or undrivable desert conditions, meaning that you would see that there would be no weapons being moved out of that facility after the first few had been, and the ground conditions at large have been ruined by those first movements of weapons. For this reason, we are largely assuming that there probably is some sort of a small road network that connects this underground bunker to the larger outside world. And we also believe that there's probably a decent amount of evidence and proof of construction that was conducted around the bunker, because one, they would have had to ship off the actual waste, pretty much the rock, somewhere that they bored out of the side of a mountain somewhere to create this bunker, and secondly, there would have had to have been a decent above ground construction site with a large amount of vehicles and equipment to be able to produce this bunker in the first place, meaning that we most likely already know where the position of this bunker is, and the Iranians, while showing it off, really aren't showing us anything new that we already didn't know about. Moving on from that, it appears that the United States still isn't going to play games, and while the Iranians want to act like they are really impressive and almighty and powerful with a nice underground bunker, or pretty much a glorified hole, it appears that the United States of America is showing off something else, as we've been able to hear that the largest B-2 bomber presence within the entirety of the world outside the United States ever seen in history is occurring right now. Following the arrival earlier today of two B-2 Spirit long-range strategic stealth bombers with a 509th Bomb Wing from the Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, communications between the bombers and ground stations in San Francisco have confirmed that another flight of 2 to 3 B-2s from Whiteman are currently crossing the Pacific Ocean, destined for Diego Garcia. This is seeming like a much larger buildup than would be needed for strikes just against the Houthis in Yemen. From what we understand right now, it's not just 5 B-2 stealth bombers that are currently at Diego Garcia. We are understanding that there is an overwhelmingly large number of stealth bombers at Diego Garcia, numbering somewhere around 7. 7 B-2 stealth bombers is wildly significant in number. It means that around 40% of all B-2 stealth bombers inside the United States are currently at Diego Garcia right now. The United States only has, by the way, about 20 operational B-2 stealth bombers. With this in mind, the United States of America, or specifically the United States Air Force, appears to be preparing for armed action against the Islamic Republic of Iran using B-2 stealth bombers to conduct precision strikes on the Islamic Republic of Iran and providing the Iranians limited to no opportunities to be able to conduct surface-to-air missile fire to try and intercept or shoot down these B-2 stealth bombers as they're conducting their operations against Iran. It's also highly likely that the B-2 stealth bombers will be supported by other units based around the surrounding areas inside of countries like Israel, possibly not Israel, but more so Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other nations, where we may see that U.S. air wings, such as SEAD air wings, electronic warfare units, and also air superiority and air-to-ground units are also stationed as well. Although we don't really have a lot of information on that at this point, and it does appear that the United States military operations are still largely focused on the Houthis. But this move of B-2 bombers today into Diego Garcia is clearly showing that the United States has larger ambitions to deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran at a sooner, but not really that much later date. Moving on from that, though, there has been another major development that happened in the Middle East today, and that was the diplomatic talks in between the United States of America and the Russian Federation over the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian delegators, or the Ukrainian diplomatic delegation, wasn't really involved in these talks in between the United States and Russia, nor was Europe involved either. It was more so a talk directly between the United States and Russia. At this moment, we did hear that it appears that there was supposed to be a joint statement, and the joint statement was then canceled. The planned joint statement expected earlier today from the United States and Russia has since been canceled for a currently unknown reason, with one of the senior diplomats of the Russian negotiating team in Saudi Arabia, Grigory Karasin, stating, "We are far from a full-fledged solution or agreement on all points, but it seems that such a discussion is timely," pretty much meaning, in very diplomatic wordage, they're getting nowhere. Adding that negotiations were challenging but useful, meaning that they're getting a lot of information about where the U.S. standpoint is at, but they're not willing to really bend to the U.S. standpoint at all, while calling for future negotiations to include the United Nations, meaning they want the United Nations to try and strong-arm the United States. This is something that's letting us know that the reason why the joint statement was canceled, and it appears that nothing really happened, is because the United States and Russia aren't really getting anywhere. And the United States is trying to hide it and make it sound like there are large successes going on, but the reality of the fact is that there really isn't any. We also were able to hear that a Russian diplomat did say that really nothing came out of the talks. Once again, Grigory Karasin stated that the talks were challenging but useful, and noted that the full agreement is still far off, urging further UN involvement. This is showing us that Grigory Karasin, who's one of the head Russian diplomats, is clearly stalling and making it nowhere in these negotiations, because if there was any kind of a leeway or ground to be made, we would see that the Russians would have accepted the unlimited, unconditional ceasefire that the Ukrainians and the United States proposed to the Russians without any stipulations. The Russians want every single kind of stipulation that can be made to be brought forward to stall these negotiations and see that the United States, Ukraine, and Europe pretty much conduct a policy of appeasement to the Russian Federation and pretty much lift every single kind of punishment that's put on them, and then the Russians have to be trusted to do what they claimed they were going to do, when clearly, historically, they've never done anything that they promised they would do. And that actually moves us on into what came of this. We have been able to hear that Zelensky today did confirm that a 30-day energy and naval ceasefire will be going into effect. This video clip right here, which we really cannot show because I'm not exactly sure of the copyright on this one, is showing Zelensky stating what was actually in the deal. And according to what we've heard, Black Sea and energy ceasefires take effect today, and according to Zelensky, he stated that we won't strike their energy and they won't strike ours. Both sides have agreed not to target each other's energy infrastructure, and if Moscow breaks the truce, Ukraine will ask the President of the United States for weapons and new sanctions. The agreement also includes free navigation in the Black Sea, and third parties may monitor the ceasefire. According to U.S. diplomats and U.S. governmental Council statements, this has been the major success of the century. We are going to see that the peace has finally arrived in Ukraine, and the Russians, who are just the truly greatest people on earth, better than anyone, will never conduct an attack against the Ukrainians or anyone else again. But the Russian story is a lot different. It's actually incredibly different, to the point that it doesn't even seem to be the same story. This is what the Russian Federation said came out of the ceasefire agreement from today, which once again is very minimal. We already were supposed to have seen, just to clarify this, that a 30-day energy infrastructure ceasefire already went into effect about a week and a half ago, at least according to the President of the United States. The President of the United States stated that Putin claimed that he was not going to be striking energy infrastructure from that point forward about a week and a half ago, which is about 12 days ago. Now we're seeing that they had to finally come around to creating some form of an agreement, and then also giving the Russians concessions to actually bring a real energy ceasefire into being, meaning that Putin has already lied to the President of the United States. He stated that there was going to be no further attacks by the Russian Federation on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, and we've already accounted for at least 3 major attacks against Ukrainian energy infrastructure in the last 12 days. Those are 3 different instances where the Russians violated the already supposedly existent ceasefire. Now we can see that the Russian Federation is now claiming that this ceasefire technically isn't in effect either. And in long form, this entire summary, which was very well summarized by Anton Gerashenko on Twitter, pretty much summarizes that the Russian Federation is stating that that is the ceasefire agreement, a 30-day energy and naval ceasefire, but the Russians are not going to be putting that into effect until the United States of America and Europe lifts all of the exact sanctions that the Russian Federation wanted to have lifted in this agreement, meaning that they have to be pretty much completely reconnected to the SWIFT banking systems. They also have to have their ability to sell agricultural exports to the open world at large without any sort of hindrances whatsoever, and they have to be able to have all of these terms achieved before they ever stop hitting Ukrainian energy infrastructure, meaning that right now the Ukrainians are hamstrung because they did agree that starting today the energy and naval ceasefire begins. They won't be attacking Russia at all as far as the naval situation is concerned, or as far as the energy infrastructure situation is concerned, for 30 days. However, Russia's 30-day window doesn't start today, because the Russians just claim that's not how it works. So they're going to keep hitting Ukrainian energy infrastructure, and they're going to continue to attack Ukrainian maritime shipping, shipping out grains from their country, until everyone appeases the Russians and gets them their terms exactly when they want them, and then, and only then, once they have all the cards on their table and all of the sanctions largely have been lifted against their agricultural industry, then they'll go and maybe follow through with a ceasefire for 30 days. That's what the Russians are currently saying. It once again is showing that they are playing the American diplomats, they're playing the U.S. government, and they do not want a meaningful peace. If they wanted a meaningful peace and they truly wanted to stop people from dying, they would have agreed to the unconditional ceasefire with no stipulations quite some time ago, several weeks ago at this point. They haven't. They are continuing to show that they have no good faith approach to any of these diplomatic negotiations. They agreed today in Riyadh to a ceasefire, and then right afterwards stated, but we're only going to agree to a ceasefire if it's done on our terms, exactly when we want it and how we want it. And while Ukraine's going to play by the book, we're not going to play by the book. It's the oldest story. It's the oldest trick in the book. We've been seeing this for 3 years, and I do not know why the United States even wants to play along with us at all anymore, or why we continue to push ourselves to play along with it, because it is very clear that the Russian Federation is an enemy of the United States, and that they are an hostile power that has no positive intentions or goodwill towards us or Europe or Ukraine or anyone for that matter that's not in their sphere of influence. Moving on from that, though, we've also seen that the Russians haven't really had any goodwill towards the Czechs, as we have heard that a major ammo depot explosion occurred today inside the Czech Republic near Borzhina, and it appears that this is something that probably was conducted by the Russian FSB. In 2014, Russian GRU agents actually blew up an ammunition depot in another Czech Czech town, killing 2 people in that explosion. It appears that there may be some sort of a correlation between the two, and this explosion today in Borzhina may have been another attempt by the Russian Federation to conduct an actual act of sabotage against Czech military infrastructure and munitions supplies, clearly showing us once again that the Russian Federation is not a friend. They are not a friend of anyone. If they had respect for America and they had respect for the Europeans, they wouldn't be blowing up ammunition dumps in the Czech Republic. But they're blowing up ammunition dumps in the Czech Republic because they have no respect for an attempted peace. They are looking to achieve a victory and achieve a Russian sphere of influence in Eastern Europe by all measures and by all means. Not at all acceptable. The diplomatic world isn't fair. The Russians sucked at running their country for the past 30 years. Everyone got scared of them and asked to join NATO, and we accepted them into NATO. You can't really go and start throwing a temper tantrum because your country sucks at being a country since 1991, really since the dawn of time, because through the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and the Russian Federation has always been largely an enemy of most other nations' interests, either in Europe or around the entire of the world. We've also been able to hear that the European Union is once again largely seeing that Russian aggression against European nations will be coming soon. And we're now seeing that they are making a nationwide announcement that bottled water, energy bars, a flashlight, and other items, incidentals, must be prepared because every household in the 27-country bloc of the European Union needs to have a 3-day survival kit ready in case crisis strikes, whether it be a major war, which is the highly likely option, or some form of a natural disaster, which is the least likely option. It's clearly once again showing us that everyone in Europe is understanding the situation's not getting better. The Polish are mining their border. The Lithuanians are mining their border as well. The Polish are conducting mass conscription of their male citizens and preparing them and training them for military service. The Germans are upping their military budget. The French have gone into hyperdrive producing weaponry. The British are upping their military budget. And not only that, they are also trying to figure out their strategic positioning inside of NATO and the European Union, as that seems to be possibly in risk. The entire region knows that there is a war coming, and it's fairly clear when you know that Russian forces are sitting at Grodno right now and in Kaliningrad, in the Kaliningrad Oblast, in the tens of thousands, if not the hundreds of thousands. There are about 30,000 Russian soldiers right now, somewhere near Grodno or somewhere within eastern Belarus, and there's about 150 to 300,000 Russian soldiers in Kaliningrad right now. That clearly is showing that they are looking to possibly create an offensive in the future at some point around the Suwalki Gap and cut off the entirety of the Baltics from NATO. That is a very clear and obvious thing. Everyone in Europe is seeing it, but the Russians are not acting in good faith in any negotiations concerning Ukraine right now. The writing is on the wall. The Russians are still an incredibly hostile power, and they're looking to continue their ambitions within Eastern Europe, which Putin has been making incredibly clear for years now. I mean, Sergei Lavrov made a statement today. I didn't include it here in this video, but he made a statement that the Russian Federation views Europe and America as weak and feeble. This is their foreign minister stating this, and that a new world order will rise with the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Iranians at the helm. Word for word statement right there. I don't know why we're not seeing this, but the Russians are as hostile as they've ever been, if not even more hostile, because they are still openly looking for the destruction of the United States and the West at large. But moving on from that and out of that bit of news, it is time for us to get on down into southern Ukraine, because we were able to hear that once again it is quite clear to many who have been involved in the situation with the Russian Federation that the Russian Federation is to be trusted, but for some reason the United States is acting like they can be trusted. Zelensky did state to the President of the United States that simply transferring the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant back to Ukraine will not work, and it will not work without us and will not work for the Russians. The President of the United States stated that the plant needs to be repaired, and Zelensky also stated that it would take 2 to 2.5 years to bring the ZMPP back under operational, I guess you could say, capacity. However, we've also heard that the Russian Federation will not be allowing for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant anytime soon to be brought back under Ukrainian control, because while we have trusted the Russians, once again, through and through, we can trust them with everything, although they continuously lie to us and to our face, like Putin did just a few days ago, or really a week and a half ago, and then the Russians lie to our face today and agree to a ceasefire, and then right afterwards state that we're not agreeing to anything until we get everything we want. Now we're saying, well, they could possibly transfer the ZMPP back to Ukraine and have that nuclear power plant back under the control of the Ukrainian state. Then the Russians come out, as the United States is for some reason blindly trusting the Russian Federation, and the foreign ministry under Sergei Lavrov is now stating that NATO intelligence agencies have sabotage capabilities, making it impossible for NATO countries to temporarily enter the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to transfer it back to the state of Ukraine, meaning that there is going to be no transfer process, according to the Russians, if it involves NATO, which is the one that would have to be involved in transferring it back to Ukraine, meaning that Russia would be able to once again hamstring this as well and keep the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant under their indefinite control, because there would be no way to process it back into Ukraine. The Russians will not let the Ukrainians just retake it simply, and they're also not going to allow any third-party intermediary, like, say, a multinational NATO coalition, go to the ZMPP, put it under a limited, I guess you could say, interim zone of control, and then slowly integrate it back over to the Ukrainians and allow the Ukrainians to take control of it again. They won't even allow that. Every single thing that's happened today with the Russian Federation is clearly showing that they are still on the warpath, not only with Ukraine, but the entirety of Europe and really the Western world at large, including the United States. They view all of them as an enemy. And this is even on top of that, coming at a time when the Russian Federation is doing so bad economically that 12 Chinese auto manufacturers are wanting to leave Russia due to the low demand of their cars. According to Russian automobile dealers associations, Russians are losing interest in the cars due to the high prices and the lack of service infrastructure. But from what we're largely understanding, these are not exactly high prices. It's the fact that Russians cannot afford any of these automobiles because they're hardly making any money at all, because the Russian economy is near to the point of collapse. Give it about another year, the Russian economy may not even exist anymore due to the significant pressures of the war that's currently going on right now. And it is fairly obvious that the Chinese auto manufacturers are leaving not because the prices are too high for Chinese goods. Where in the world, like, let me ask all of y'all this really quickly. Where in the world has anyone heard Chinese goods are too expensive? When in the world has anyone heard that? Like, you can go into Walmart and you can buy anything that was made in China for about a third of the price of any other good manufactured anywhere else in the world, whether it was Europe or the United States. So the Russians are going to try and pull a stupid statement and make it sound like it's the company's faults from China that their goods are too expensive. If Chinese goods are expensive relative to some citizens in the national economy, that means that those citizens are broke. They don't have money to afford anything hardly at that point, because it's not like Chinese goods break the bank. And if it's breaking the bank for the Russians, that's telling us that they're far worse off than they're even publicly stating, for these companies to be getting absolutely no sales. But it's an absolutely wild thing that the Russian Federation is still taking the strongman perspective and possibly even positioning itself for a major war with NATO or Europe as a whole, as their economy is suffering so badly that nobody can even afford cheap Chinese cars inside of the Russian Federation. It is truly an absolute clown show with the Russians. But nevertheless, that is all of our major news that we had today. I got to thank each and every one of y'all so much once again for watching. And if y'all have enjoyed, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Today's short war summary was a little bit more rhetorical or filled with more rhetoric, because it's just crazy to see how ill-intentioned the Russians are quite openly in any kind of diplomatic negotiations. But I hope y'all enjoyed it nevertheless. If y'all did, of course, subscribe. If you really liked it, hit the like button. And if you really made it to this point in the video, put a comment down below. And I would like y'all to put Czech in the comments section below. That is CZECH, or you can put the little IA behind it as well, because that's their official name, but I always call them the Czech Republic. But if you do want to, put Czech in the comments below to let me know that you made it to this point in the video. And if you really enjoyed this video, please make sure to support us on Patreon. Patreon helps us to be able to make these video projects possible, and we got to give a massive thanks to all the folks over there who have been supporting us on this channel, because y'all help us to make this thing possible day in and day out, making it possible for us to do this as a full-time job and cover the news each and every single day, so that we all know what's actually going on in the world. But still, a huge thanks to you all once again for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.